Hey guys, John McLaughlin here. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to show you today essentially how to use the Follow Up Boss API on a very practical use case scenario. It can seem overwhelming how to dig into the Follow Up Boss API and using it in your business. We're going to show you a very practical use case example on how to change the stage of a lead based off of other information happening. We're going to show you how to pull that API data or get that API data from Follow Up Boss. And then we're going to show you how to set up your APIs, how to organize your APIs, and hopefully in a way that makes you encouraged to want to dive right in, knowing that it's overwhelming in most cases without really seeing or knowing what it's like to get started. So before I dig deep into the next steps, we're going to start really super simple and explain what's Zapier. So basically Zapier allows us to connect endpoints of different applications connected by data fields of those different applications. So the merge fields of different applications, whether it's phone numbers, emails, stages, or whatever else we're talking about from thousands of different applications, they can all be connected together through Zapier. So what starts a Zap, something has to happen first, which is a trigger. Once an event triggers, it could be anything from a new lead coming into a system or a line going into a spreadsheet or anything else. Thousands of triggers exist. Whenever a trigger happens, then we want to have something else occur next, which is the action. So an event will only occur after the trigger happens first. So now that we hopefully understand more about, we're gonna show you a practical example of what I'm going to show you today is a use case of changing the stage of a lead once certain call data occurs within Follow Up Boss. So in practice, my team will call leads when they're new. Crazy concept, right? When leads come into our system, our team's going to call them. So the intention is I don't want to have leads that are brand new appear in the same bucket as leads that have been new in the last 2, 3, 4 days that have been called 3, 4, 5 times. That lead already knows we're trying to call them. I don't want them to be in the same bucket or get the same automation content that a brand new lead will. And so I want to separate them into different buckets. So you can change a lead stage from lead to whatever else you want in Follow Up Boss, but you've got to do it manually once you make that phone call. I want to trigger that changing of the stage once something happens, like I call a lead, but they didn't answer and they're in this stage. I want to move them based off of something else happening first. So in order to do that, I've got to pull or get certain data related to that lead. And then once certain things happen, I'm telling Follow Up Boss to change the stage, but that all happens through Zapier. I hope that makes sense. Hope that's simple enough to comprehend. And I'm going to break down real quick how this is set up. Then I'm going to go into showing you how to break down and create your API steps within Follow Up Boss. And then we're going to come back and put it all together. So getting started, we've got the event. The trigger, the event, it can be one of several things. Follow Up Boss allows us to make these triggers be one of the first steps. What I'm trying to figure out now is, I don't care if it's just a new contact. It could be whenever the stage updates from not existing to lead. In this case, as long as the stage becomes lead, it should trigger the next step occurring. So now what Zapier is going to do, it's going to now get all the information that's available in Follow Up Boss that has just this stage name. So I can click on this box here and scroll down and see all the stages that are available. In my case, I only want to pull in leads or get leads that show up as a lead stage in Follow Up Boss. So you can see all the records that are coming through here. They all have stage as lead. So keeping this super granular, right? You see that the IDs are going to change and all of these merge fields are the same, but the data that shows up, it's going to be different. Meaning what's holding all these placeholder data fields together These are all the same, but the data itself is all different. I hope that makes sense. In this case, we want to take an example record, knowing that as we connect pieces of data together, as future leads come into the system and match this criteria, this example contact is going to be the framework for additional leads to follow suit without having to do this step every time. So we're going to use this example here of Tim Plessinger, right? This contact right here. We're going to continue with the selected record, and then we have our trigger completed. Now we have our event. The event for the action right now, there are several available from Follow Up Boss because I cannot pull right now with any of these existing events the stage that it is. I can change the stage, but I can't choose a stage. I cannot filter out or get any of the call data within the leads. I can only do that by an API request. So again, I'm going to show you this example. It's going to be a little overwhelming at first. I'm going to then go into the API reference docs to put this all together to make sense of it. So the first step I'm looking at here is this HTTP method or the API call. This is going to be the get. I'm getting data. These are the different API call methods that are available, and we're going to get data. That's essentially what this means. I'm getting data from this API endpoint, and this triggers a specific lead within Follow Up Boss. So API endpoint, and then I can check this box here. There's way more other fields here I could choose, but the way the endpoint data structure is for specific people in Follow Up Boss, you have to have the ID for the contact match at the end of the URL. So now I pull this lead ID because you see how number 1 here, person stage updated, that came from whenever the stage was updated from the first step, it pulled in or got all of that data for that lead. Let me show you again, all these points, these merge fields, all of these fields are now available to us to select as event actions moving forward. So that's the beauty of Zapier. We're creating this framework for future leads. When they come into the system, this field is now going to update whenever a new lead comes in. The ID is going to change. So the URL is going to stay the same. The ID will change for future leads. Now I'm going to search or filter through the fields that are available within the API call, right, to just this data, because I want to only have access to and see outgoing calls. How many have there been? Calls duration, how long have they been? The stage, what stage is this contact in? That's all that I need, because I need certain data points to match in order for me to say, okay, once these occur, then I can change the stage of the contact. So how do I know what fields to look for? Great question. I'm going to jump real quick into the contact itself within Follow Up Boss to kind of put this all together on the IDs and merge fields. So you see we have the name, the phone number, the email address. In Follow Up Boss, all of these fields, these are all merge fields, right? As we just showed you in Zapier, these all have their own ID, and the data that's connected to that lead also has its own data or its own ID. In this case, the ID for this contact, it's right here, the 4210. You see it in the URL. If we want to change this and put it as 09 instead, it'll show a different contact record, right? So we see the 42210. This is the same as the ID that was gotten from the merge field ID from the step 1 here. So the ID matches, and we can now see it from within Follow Up Boss that I goofed here. This is the URL for this ID. This is the ID that matches for this contact. And so as we're going into the API reference docs, this is where we get to pause a little bit in the Zapier side and break down where to find all the pieces of data. So these API reference docs, you can find these clicking right here within Zapier, the API.followupboss. All this documentation is all here for you. So to get started, this is the API endpoint we talked about. This is the same framework for every single resource that's available in the API. So we see how people, this was the same field that we referenced over here in this endpoint. So the same framework that was available on right here, HTTPS, API.followBoss, and one, people, this is where it comes from. So because we have the ID for our lead, we're gonna put in here 42, right? This is gonna allow us to search the path parameters of the ID for that person, okay? Now, you remember before, when we had the query string parameters of these fields, calls outgoing, calls duration, and stage. Well, we can find out which fields are related to that data because we've gone through and looked at the response history and see what fields will show up. If we want to see all the fields available to us, you see we have all fields here. Here's something pretty interesting about this API. I'm going to just type in all fields here and then try it out. You see how it has an invalid field? Well, John, it matches. No, it's actually case sensitive. It has to match exactly to the case. And then it will show all the data that's available for that contact. We've got call data, we've got the custom fields, all the things related to this lead ID. See how the name, first name, last name, all the tags, all the things here. So what we're trying to do to bring this all together, we're trying to take a lead and we're trying to say when it's in a particular stage, right? It's got to be in the lead stage. This is the query field is stage. We also want to take the number of outgoing calls, which we know is 0, because if there's been any calls made on a lead, this will show up as 1 or 2 or 3. We want this to be more than 0 for our Zap to work, because calls duration, this would also have to be 0. So yes, we have 2 of the 3 fields that we want, but we're using this example for us to be able to have this be the framework for other future leads. We need stage to be lead. We need calls outgoing to at least be 1 or greater than 0. And then we need the calls duration to be exactly 0. Because if there's been any communication or any dialogue called out from or called in from followBoss, then it'll have a length of the call. Duration of the call will show up here. So these are the 3 points that we need, and these are the fields that we're referencing, okay? Calls outgoing, calls duration, and so that's how in our query string parameters, that's why we're only filtering through and pulling up just these 3 fields. We're gonna continue, retest this step, and we're gonna see the only fields that pop up are the 3 that we need. The lead, call duration, and then calls outgoing down here at the bottom. Remember, we only want to move on to the final event, which is changing the stage to attempted contact once these 3 things match. So how do we create a filter, if you will, or a way to simplify? This next step will only happen if this particular data shows up the exact way that we want. How do we do that? Glad you asked. With a filter. There's apps available within Zapier that allow you to filter data based off of what is available to us from the API request. So this is why we can now take the response data stage. So we've pulled in the data, or we've gotten the data from within the API request. It's got to match exactly lead. We don't want it to be closed or under contract. It's got to be lead. And then the call duration has to be 0, because if there's been a phone call, it'll show a time in that spot. And then if response data outgoing calls, there has to be more than 0. So if somebody has called, it'll show the number of calls that have shown up. If it's 1 or more, it's gotta be. So lead has not had a conversation yet, and there's been more than no calls. There's been at least 1 call attempt made. Let's retest this filter to see would it have gone through, and of course the answer is no, because there has been no outgoing calls made yet. And so if I move on to the next step, the final stage, the event is changing the stage of the contact. Now I get to see if the previous 3 events occurred in the order that I want, and this data is available to me the way that I want, it'll then produce the last step, which is changing the stage. So this contact step is going to reference the ID for this lead, which is the same from the first step. Okay. The stage, we're going to move the stage to attempted contact because that's what is available to us once we've logged back in. Attempted contact. What I'm going to show you now is I go back into the lead itself within Follow Up Boss. I'm going to show you right now the lead shows up as stage. What I'm doing with this test, when I test this step right here, what's happening is I'm only going to be testing this one step, which is the action for whatever ID field is triggered, or in this placeholder step here, it's going to change to attempted contact. This will only happen in practice, in real life, once this has been published, when the other 3 steps have occurred first. However, we know at this point we've built it out well enough to know once these 3 items occur, if I can test this and it will show up as attempted contact after the fact, that means I've connected this event correctly, and when it's finished, ideally within Follow Up Boss, there it is. Now that it's changed, the stage shows up as attempted contact. We can see here that the test has been successful, and so now we know whenever these 3 steps occur first in this order, then the 4th will occur. So let's now go back to the very beginning before we wrap this video up. To set up your API, we have to create a key so that whenever you access the API in the future, or another application accesses the API into the future, you have to be able to identify it without having to log in every time. Imagine in the background, whenever this happens, you have to log in and put in your username and password. There's no way to do that in practice. So you've got to create an API key. You do that by going under admin, scroll down to integrations, and then API keys. You're going to create a new API key, and once you type in the name, you're going to create the name for the app that you're going to connect. You see how I've got other apps here like Brokermint and Ylopo and Zillow? So the API key that's here is specific and only given once. Don't give this to anybody, because this is essentially the keys to the front door for your entire database. Okay, so this allows anybody to access your database if they have this API key. So give it to nobody and only provide it to the third-party resources that you trust, like you should for the Zapier and other third-party API integrations. So once we have the API key set up, we're going to go back to the API reference docs within Follow Up Boss, and we're going to go to identification. You see here there's an X system, an X system key. Well, you're going to register this system once you're logged in, because every API key request should include this header in some way based off the data that you are requesting and getting or putting back into Follow Up Boss. So to register your system, you just type in a name, whatever name you want. You can call it John's Peanut Factory, right? Whatever you want it to be, it's going to create the system ID header that matches that, and it's going to send an email to your tech email that gives you a system key. Again, don't give this to anybody. You're going to give this to yourself and nobody else, or maybe your dev team if you have one. But you're going to save it somewhere safe. You're going to reference it in the future, because for certain examples like person attachments, if you're going to take an attachment for a particular person in Follow Up Boss, you have to put in the X system and X system key in addition to the ID of the attachment in order for you to reference this API call in Follow Up Boss. So we use just this one example of taking the lead and then pulling in or getting the call data, and then we've then taken it to change the stage within Follow Up Boss. Well, let's say instead, I'm going to go back over to this over here. Let's say instead I wanted to send out an email, Gmail, right? So once all this is done, let's say I want to send an email out to somebody. Well, you can do the exact same thing here. Connect to your email account and you can send out an email. And then what's crazy now is that all these points that are available from these other steps, triggers, and actions, they now become embeddable fields within the next step here. So let's say that you want to connect to Google Docs or Calendar. Let's say that once this happens or you set an appointment, you can now create an event for a Google Calendar invite. Or let's say that let's say Real Geeks or RealVolve, there's thousands of applications that are available to take certain data points and in turn create other steps based off of the data available to you. Here's a much larger example of this. So for my team, for example, I'm able to take a spreadsheet row. So whenever we go under contract, we have got a form that's filled out. Then once the form is filled out, it creates a sheet in Google Sheets. Then it creates a message in Slack to congratulate the agents. Then it sends out an email to the inspectors. Then it sends out an email to the title company. Then it sends an email out to the surveyor. So all those steps that were typically manually done or you had a TC do, you can automate all of this stuff by hand. Now let's take it up a notch. In the spreadsheet, I can't show all the fields here, but I can show you that whenever you create this form or you fill out the form, you can upload your contract to that form within Google Forms. So now those contract docs can now become an attachment in a deal. So I want to update now, see we have post deal attachment. I can attach that file to the deal within Follow Up Boss for reference at any point in the future. Same thing if I want to create it as a custom field. So now once the closing has occurred, I can use this custom field and automate sending out a reminder for those people that bought last year. They can get an automated email in the spring so that they know how to get access to their docs for their CPA. Stuff like that is accessible, which I'll teach you in another video. For now, hope this makes sense. And if you have any other questions, post them in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I appreciate your time. And again, any questions, comments, the other video will be posted hopefully soon, and we will see you around. Thanks for watching.